Thanks for joining me.
This lab session is entitled More on JMeter and Analysis Lab. It is easy enough to search the internet for tools that provide performance data external to JMeter. Performance data that can help analyze the performance on a client machine, the network, web, and app services, along with database activity. In doing so, it is paramount to collect the data in sync with the execution time of the JMeter test run. Then any spikes or anomalies can be correlated to JMeter reports over time. I have used tools like Dynatrace, AppDynamics, SiteScope, and New Relic, which are performance monitors. There is even Prometheus, which is an open source tool. In the industry, they are known as APMs, Application Performance Monitors. These tools combined with JMeter to help identify bottlenecks that may be affecting a target application. Some of these tools integrate with JMeter, but any of these tools can be running independently of JMeter. When the test is completed, you use the APM to extract performance data that represents the runtime of the JMeter performance test. Then you can do some level of correlation to draft a report of findings. Join me in this lab, I hope, which will provide you with useful information on what is possible to aid you with JMeter test results analysis. Since this course is about JMeter, I present the question, but what can JMeter do without purchasing these monitor tools?
Okay, let's start with answering the question, what can JMeter do regarding application performance monitoring? And then we'll look at some online searches I did to find out what application performance monitors can integrate with JMeter. So we have both worlds here. We can start with JMeter. Let's take a look at this script here. This is the load test script, as a matter of fact, for web tours, and I added another plugin that is called Perfmon Metrics Collector. And I also actually ran this load test again so that I could provide some output from Perfmon. Now, Perfmon, I want to let you know, is this particular plugin is very similar to the Perfmon you'll see on servers, and even Perfmon runs on desktops and laptops to provide you with performance data. And this particular collector working inside of JMeter, you need to know that if you have sufficient memory, that like you do on a server, then you won't have much problems with using it inside the GUI JMeter execution. Now, excuse me, like some of the other plugins, Perfmon provides you with some configuration capabilities. So here you can specify what server or computer you're trying to reach, typically with an IP address, but you can also specify localhost for the desktop or laptop that you're running on. We typically use the 4444 port. You can change that to something else, but this is good as any. And you can specify one or more metrics categories that you want to collect. And so I selected CPU, I didn't select memory, and I went to disk I/O. And what I was trying to do is see if I could show something that communicates what seems to be going on this machine when the application is running at a load. And the load was up to 100 concurrent users. Okay, so additionally, like some of the other plugins, you have other configurations that you can select and process. But I left it pretty much bland here. I just selected CPU and disk I/O. And of course, what you see on the output is this red one has to do with the CPU, and the blue line, graph line, has to do with disk I/O. You'll notice that as far as CPU is concerned, it almost looks like once the users were logged in at a peak, the CPU reached a peak as well. It was bordering at 100% CPU utilization. Interesting. Also, you'll notice that as far as I/O was concerned, it was running fine, not much activity, and then we have these two huge spikes. And once the ramp down started occurring for the functions, so did the I/O. So that indicates that at some point, maybe it got to the 100 concurrent users point. We're not quite sure, but this is a good indication of what was happening during these load and stress tests, especially. That I/O was definitely a major cause, but also we were at 100% CPU utilization, so that could slow down the process. Neither one of these are a good thing to happen during these load tests. We know that we try to reach breaking points in stress testing, so you might see that kind of thing. But with a load test, even though that load test ran okay, no major failures, what did happen was the response time for all of the functions were much higher than expected. I think we recorded one of the items in the observation was like 1,200% increase in response time. That's very high. All right, let's move on. Want to talk to you more about, again, what JMeter brings to the table. So we see for application performance monitoring, this is a good plugin that's made available in JMeter. So that can be utilized, and it's very similar to some of what you see in an application performance monitor. But let's look also at Options Plugins Manager. Now, let me back to the install. We have these plugins installed, and I think there are, other than the perfmon, that is the main one that would have to do with what I would consider application performance monitoring. Now, let's look at some other tools that are available, still called plugins. One is anywhere you see a back-end listener, here, and I think there are one or two others down the list. But these back-end listeners, what those are doing is taking performance data from JMeter and moving it into these other tools that will run in a background environment or externally to JMeter. So that's good for Azure if you got some performance testing that you're doing associated with that product. Or what was the other one we mentioned? Datadog. Datadog is another application performance monitor that we didn't mention, but it is available. It is used widely. And let's scroll down a little further. Graphics generator listener. That, again, is providing some application performance monitoring capability to JMeter. We have a JMeter listener pack. If you click on this, you can get more detail here and sometimes go to more documentation on the subject. I'm not going to do all that in this session. And there is Prometheus, and Prometheus is the one we were talking about. I mentioned that it is an open source tool. Well, JMeter has a plugin to work with Prometheus. Then let's see, what else do we have? We have these Ubic. I just started looking at those, and I think this provides quite a bit of help with correlating external application performance data as well as the GWT and video streaming. So those seem to be of interest, and if you are working with products that are associated with Ubic, and I'm not that familiar with the company, if it is a company. Let's see, anything else here? That should be it. So, be aware that you may not have all of these installed, and you may want to install certain ones, like the ones that we mentioned, and take a look at them and go into more detail about it, working with the documentation that they provide and whatever instructions they provide to set them up. The one I did for you, having to do with Perfmon, that was fairly easy to set up. There was only one additional thing that had to be done, and that was according to the documentation associated with it. But there is an agent that actually runs. It's a piece of software that will run and enable the integration between Perfmon and JMeter. So it's in the instructions. It's fairly easy to set up. As a matter of fact, I could show you where I installed that and what it looks like. It's basically just a zip file that you pull down from the GitHub site. And if I can go here, yeah, here we are. I have it open. So under JMeter, I created a folder, Perfmon Agent, and I extracted Server Agent 2.2.3 from the GitHub site that it pointed to. And this is the data, or this is what was extracted, unzipped. And we have a jar file, or a couple of jar files that are used in conjunction with JMeter. And we have a bat file, and that's how you start the tool. And then it will keep running as long as you want to use it. And it will integrate with JMeter. So when JMeter starts, it will basically log into it and connect with this agent. And then that agent will pull the performance data from the true Perfmon software that's on your machine. All right. That's all I'm going to talk about concerning JMeter, but this is useful to have a plugin like this, and some of those other plugins that I mentioned are useful as well, depending on what your application utilizes or what your company has available. Now, I will stop at this point, and when I come back, we'll talk about what findings you could look at and go into more detail to understand how to use some of the application performance monitors that integrate with JMeter. So I took a moment in the browser to look at some of the APMs we had talked about. First one is App Dynamics. By doing a search in Google, you can just specify like JMeter and some APM product like App Dynamics, Dynatrace, and what have you. And you should find a number of items that are listed and that go into detail about how to use JMeter with that particular APM product. So for App Dynamics, what I went to was a site called docplayer.net, and it has a 14-page document that goes into talking about that very thing, the purpose and what it takes to install JMeter with App Dynamics, or to connect the two together to test with. And so it gets into some detail, and it shows what might be an end product where you have certain events identified in your JMeter test, and over on the App Dynamics side, it can capture that information and report on it. And it's just about connecting those two. And I think in this case, this particular product makes use of the JMeter HTTP header manager. So you specify something in particular there, and that gets utilized by all of your action events or HTTP requests, and it picks that up in App Dynamics and reports on it. So that's a good combination there. And as I said, let me remind you that you could just as easily run App Dynamics by itself or at the time when a test is running in JMeter and still collect the similar data, but you don't have that correlation that will occur when you integrate the two together. All right, and then I did a similar kind of search for JMeter Dynatrace, see if it had something. And I believe I have that over on this particular one. And let's go back to the top here. Yeah. And again, this tool uses the HTTP header manager to pull it together. And I think I don't have actual detail what the tool looks like, but it's probably somewhere here. I'm missing it. I thought I had that one. You can see it also integrates with some other performance test tools like LoadRunner and NeoLoad. Let's just move on. So anyway, if you look into it further, you'll find the information that will go into more detail about what does the APM look like and in its relationship to JMeter. Okay, and then I didn't mention I was going to do this, but I did go after BlazeMeter. BlazeMeter is a good product as well, and it has its own set of monitoring tools that come with its product to integrate with JMeter, allow you to run your JMeter scripts, and also interface with AWS, the servers that are out across the US and the globe, so that you can make use of those machines to run your test at much high levels, thousands and thousands of users, without impacting your local machines. And so it also provides a lot of information regarding the use of JMeter and APMs and other tools that can be interfaced with JMeter. It does a good job of talking about them. Like this subject here is how to monitor your server health and performance during a JMeter load test. So this is a good article to go into and take a look at, and it'll talk about the plugins, it'll talk about the perfmon plugin and the server agent. It'll go into quite a bit of detail about it. And if you're having any problems with that, this is probably a good article that will help you and lead you in the right direction. Okay, and then I have perfmon. I've mentioned about that. This is the site where perfmon the details for it, and you can get the zip file for the latest version of server agent to connect with the perfmon plugin. And last thing is Prometheus. So Prometheus is that tool that I said was an open source tool like JMeter, and they have a way of integrating the two together, along with, I believe, another one called Grafana, which I'm going to talk about in a later session. And there are some videos that you can look at that will be helpful to you to understand how to utilize this, because if you don't have an application performance monitor on at your company, well, you might want to consider utilizing Prometheus, being that it's an open source tool. And if you already have JMeter, this might be a good combination: JMeter, Prometheus, and Grafana. So you could take a look at the site called QAinsights.com, and that particular one goes into some details, and they have videos that they go into more detail about that combination of tool usage. That covers what I wanted to mention about. And there are probably other tools that are APMs, like the dog, whatever that one. Sorry, I forgot the name of that one again. But there are several other application performance monitors that are out there that may also integrate with JMeter in some way. Thank you for your time. My time has ended for this session. I thank you for yours. Join me in the next video.